Good morning. Today is the 29th of Shvat. It's Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar. Tomorrow we're going to start the new month of Adar and the great joy that comes with that month. And it's also the 20th of February. And we're holding by the second reading of Parashat Terumah. And in the second reading we learn about two vessels of the tabernacle. The two vessels are the covering of the Ark of the Covenant, called the kaporet, and the Table of Showbread, as it's called. Now, we began yesterday with something that I hope wasn't too philosophical, and wasn't too abstract, but we began talking about the notion that the purpose of the temple itself is to give us some hold on the concept of paradox. That the only way to really connect with God is through paradox. And the paradox here is between what we call the transcendent aspect of God and the immanent aspect of God. And something that we sort of, because of lack of time, I didn't explain it fully, I'll just explain a little bit more right now, and then we'll move on. That the paradox is because in the end, God did not create the world so that we would just be drones, in the sense that we would be meaningless. The purpose of creation is to, as he says in Psalms, and we say the Psalm actually tomorrow on Tuesday, Ani amarti Elokim atem, uvnei elyon kulchem. I have called you all gods and sons of the Most High. When he says gods, he doesn't mean gods in the sense of some kind of idolatry, of course. What he means is that man is supposed to become a partner with God in creation. And there are different levels of being a partner with God in creation. In last week's Parsha, and 2 weeks ago in Yitro, we saw that V'chol ha'am omdim al Moshe min haboker ad ha'erev. We saw that when the judges judge a true judgment, it's called, the sages say, they become partners with God in the creation of heavens and earth, which are from morning to evening. That's the description there. So there's many different ways in which man becomes a partner with God, but those are all through actions. And there's the highest form of becoming a partner with God, which is revealing the godliness within us. And what does it mean to reveal the godliness? It could be very different meanings for that. One of the meanings that we talk about a lot is that the infinite should be able to reside within the finite, meaning that man himself could become infinite in a certain sense. I want to make this a little bit more less abstract and more concrete. After the Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, Rav Steinsaltz, one of my teachers, he wrote a very interesting article in which he explained what it means to become infinite. And he told the story that when he was sometime in the mid 80s, he wrote to the Rebbe and said to him, "I have 3 jobs, all 3 of which are full-time jobs. So what I'm basically doing is, if I work 8 hours a day on each one of these jobs, I have to work 24 hours a day." And I asked the Rebbe, which one should I let go? And which one should I pass on to others, and I'll take care of the other 2. I'll remain with 2. And he says for a long time the Rebbe didn't answer. And after he pushed and pushed, finally the Rebbe sent him back an answer, and he said, add something more. And he thought this was like the joke of the guy who says, my house is too small. And then the rabbi tells him, well, bring goats in. And he says, the house is too small for the people. How do you want me to have goats? And after 2 months, the rabbi comes back and says, okay, now take the goats out. And now he feels, the house is plenty. He thought that was what was going to happen, but it never happened. The Rebbe just said, you need to take on something more. And after the Rebbe passed away, he wrote an article about this. And he wrote that the Rebbe was treating people like the way that we see stars in the night sky. That the stars, as we know them now, are tremendous amounts of mass, like in our star on the sun, it's all helium and hydrogen. but it's still mass. And eventually the mass, because of gravity, falls into itself. And the star becomes more and more dense until it becomes what we call either a white dwarf or a blue dwarf. And the idea behind these stars is that if you would take a spoonful of the matter that's created after this star has exhausted its energy supply and is beginning to fall into itself because of gravity, if you would take a spoonful of a blue dwarf or a white dwarf, it would weigh more than 10 suns. Meaning the mass there is so condensed that it's just incredible in terms of the amount that's in that. And Rav Steindl said this is what the Rebbe was trying to do. He was trying to create people. He understood that people were like stars in that sense. That when you add more weight, the more it can carry. And there's actually a statement like this in the Talmud. It says, Lefum gam la shichna. It says that depending on the abilities of the camel, that is the amount of weight you make it carry. The load depends on the camel. And it's actually that when the camel decides that it's of a higher quality and it has more strength, you can put more and more load on it and nothing happens. That is the essence of what it means to be a human being, and one of the examples of what it might mean to have the infinite within the finite. And the person becomes more and more condensed, more and more, his density goes up and up. So this is one example of it. Now, what we talked about yesterday is that the most important part of this ability to carry opposites, the infinite within the finite, comes from the measurements of the ark itself. We said that the measurements of the ark itself are all broken, they're all halves, unlike any of the other vessels in the tabernacle. All the measurements, it's 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5, indicating that we need to see ourselves in a certain sense as broken, in the sense as being not complete. And what completes us? What completes us is God. There is another vessel that has this same property, but only in one of its dimensions, and that is the Table of Showbread. The Table of Showbread also has, one of its dimensions is cut in half. The understanding is that the table represents the parnasa, the livelihood of a person. And when the table stood in the tabernacle, people had special blessing. That's another form of the infinite coming within the finite. Because by parnasa, when it comes to livelihood, we know that a person could theoretically work for 24 hours a day. But if he makes, let's say, $100 an hour, so his capacity is $2,400 a day. He can't make any more than that. To have blessing is that somehow, I mean that's a lot if anybody can hold that up, but to have blessing means that he works the same amount of hours and the livelihood that he makes from it is much greater. And there you see an example of the infinite coming into the finite. When the temple existed, a Jew could have that type of blessing and it would be connected to the table. In fact, when the temple stood and the table of showbread was functioning, there was a very interesting halacha that a person could give all his belongings to tzedakah. He could give everything away. Today, after the temple was destroyed, we're not allowed to give more than 20%. Because we say, if a person gives more than 20%, he himself will become poor and be dependent on others, and we don't want him to do that. But in the time of the temple, there's a number of famous stories in the Talmud of people who gave away their fortunes entirely, 100%. The reason they could do this was because of the blessing in the table of showbread, that the next day, already the next day, they could regain the entire fortune. That was the blessing of the infinite within the finite. And that's a blessing that everybody wants to have. So how is this related also to the kaporet, the covering above the Ark of the Covenant? There also, the kaporet, according to Rashi, is a separate vessel. According to Ramban and others, Nachmanides, it's not a separate vessel, it's part of the Ark of the Covenant. But if it is a separate vessel, what is it for? As we said yesterday, it's for hearing the words of God. Moses would hear the words of God coming from the kaporet, from the covering, and specifically between the two cherubim that were on top of it. There too, when a person learns Torah, he should be looking for the infinite within the finite. What does that mean? That from time to time, when I add more learning, it's not adding in terms of time necessarily. For instance, a person could say, the amount of time I have to learn every day is 2 hours, 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. But what he does within that hour becomes more and more dense, more and more condensed, so that the infinite begins to enter into the finite. And that is the sign of the blessing of the kaporet and the table of showbread that we learn about today, in terms of one's learning of Torah, that the infinite can dwell within the finite, that he can learn a tremendous amount within the same amount of time, and as time goes on and as he learns more and more, it becomes even more condensed, and within an hour he can do even more and more. And the same thing is true with parnasa, with livelihood, that when he has that blessing of the infinite within the finite, working the same amount of hours gives more and more product, gives more and more livelihood. So we should all be blessed with this. Today is the day that, God willing, Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar, should all be blessed both in our learning of Torah and in our livelihood, and be able to give to the point where it's as if by us the temple is already rebuilt, and we could give all our belongings away and yet receive it back completely the day after.
Amen.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Chodesh Tov, Rabbi.